of what that might be?
Like I was talking about earlier, someone can be in a delusional state but still change a diaper or drive a car. Yeah.
What about the breastfeeding?
Oh yeah, breastfeed the baby.
What about walking downstairs and getting a knife?
Yeah, I mean that's how people act out their delusional compulsions, is that they do things.
Okay. And that could be the same way about locking a door as well?
Right.
Okay.
If it's part of a delusional compulsion,
Okay.
they do it. Yeah.
All right. We've heard some evidence in this case about some Google searches and related to the time frame involved in this case. Can you explain the idea of well, we know that there were different types of searches. You're familiar with those, correct?
Right.
And then I provided those searches, internet searches to you, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you've had an opportunity to review those, correct?
Yes.
All right. Can you tell me what, in your opinion, is what kind of information you can generate from those type of searches in terms of what kind of state of mind that Ms. Driver was in at the time leading up to these events?
I mean, we can try to infer, like the searches about bus tickets. I would infer that she was trying to escape. The searches, you need to refresh my memory, sorry.
Well, we know that she searched for like items like schizophrenia, how to snap a neck,
Right.
mental institutions,
Okay,
those kind of things. Are you able to make any determination as to what was in her state of mind at the time of the crime based on those previous searches?
No.
Okay. Are any of those searches necessarily indicative of anything related to what was in her mind at the time of the crime?
No.
Okay. And in your opinion, are those searches indicative, the back and forth of those type of searches, what in your mind does that highlight to you in terms of her delusion and the compulsion?
Really all I took from those searches was it was another piece of information confirming that she was kind of in and out of being delusional and then not being delusional, or at least being the delusions and trying to resist the delusions. And when she was trying to resist the delusions, she was searching for a psychiatric hospital because she wanted help, or searching for a bus ticket because she wanted to get away. And when she was more believing the delusions, she would search for, well, how to snap a neck, I don't even know if who that refers to, but other things that she did, like get a knife, would be like when she was believing her delusions.
We know that Ms. Driver made several statements to law enforcement and to treating personnel at the Kennestone Hospital after the alleged incident. Some of those statements include, how long is my prison sentence, and discussions about her just wanting to be with Mr. Ben Michael with her child. Are any of those statements indicative one way or another as it pertains to her state of mind at the time of the crime?
No, this was after the fact when she was in the hospital, still psychotic on pain meds, knowing she had just killed her daughter, feeling suicidal. Also, the statement about just wanting to be with him and their daughter was like one phrase in a whole long statement, and when you put it in the context, like that was not the whole point of that whole statement. She was talking about being abused and things were better when there was a smaller group, and yeah, so.
But based on that, from a psychological perspective, you can't make any determinations as to what was in her mind at the time of the crime based on statements she made after the fact?
No, I think if anything, it again shows that her state of mind was fluctuating, and I think it's misguided to presume that anything she said a day later or several days later or something is stable, and that she was always thinking that way. She was all over the map.
And I believe it was your testimony today that based on the information you received, including jail records and collateral resources, that those delusions continued months after the offense in this case, correct?
Yeah, she was still having delusions when I met with her.
Okay. We've also heard testimony in this case about hundreds of phone calls to Mr. Ben Michael after she was incarcerated. Can you tell us first you reviewed some of those phone calls, correct?
I did, not all of them, there were too many, but it's several
correct.
of them.
And how do you explain, from a psychological standpoint, this continued contact in the nature with respect to Chloe Driver?
I explained it in the context that we talked about earlier about trauma bonding, about a cycle of abuse, feeling very connected to him. She'd been with him since she was 17. She had a baby with him. Also, she'd been very controlled by him, so she was used to submitting to him. So it would have been more surprising if she had just, poof, not wanted anything to do with him. That seems like, to someone who's not connected to someone that way, it seems like a no-brainer that she should have just wanted to run as far away from him as possible. But when you're in an abusive relationship like that, it often takes many attempts to get away.
Okay. And what were some of the concerns that you had with respect to the nature of the relationship based on the calls that you listened to?
How extremely controlling he was one concern. For example,
Objection, hearsay.
We've already stipulated to the foundation of the jail calls.
Still hearsay, Your Honor.
I don't know where you're going with this. Y'all obviously know.
I think she's about to say what someone else who's not here to testify said on the phone call. She can't offer her statement because it's party opponent commission rule in favor too.
These statements that go directly to the state of mind that the state's arguing that these continued contact is a way to counter any defense that we may have in this particular state, and they factored into Dr. Ballard's analysis of this particular relationship in formulating her opinion.
I don't object to the defendant's statement, but not the other person's statement.
What was?
All right. I'm sorry?
It goes to our client's state of mind in terms of how those statements affected her.
All right. I'm going to ask that y'all return to the jury room for a few minutes while we take up a matter that we cannot take up in your presence. Don't talk about the case, and we will call you back in as soon as we can. All right, thank you. You can resume.
All right, Dr. Ballard, before we took that brief break, we were talking about part of your review in this case involved you reviewing and listening to several phone calls, correct?
yes,
All right. In this case, we already know that there were hundreds of phone calls. I think you indicated you have not listened to all of them, correct?
right.
All right, but can you talk about and tell the jury about some of the content of the calls that you listened to and what your concerns were related to those?
Sure. One of the calls I listened to, the content was he was instructing, she was in jail, and he was instructing her to drink her own urine while she was in jail. And that if she felt embarrassed to do this in front of her cellmate, that she should tell her cellmate that her naturopathic doctor told her she needs to drink it or else she'll get sick. And he was saying things like, you need to do this, you can't fight me on this, you need to do this, do you understand? And she was resistant, and when he was resistant, he said, I was expecting the answer, I do, Daddy, I do. And they kind of went back and forth until she finally said, I do, Daddy, and he said, that's better, or good job, or something like that. And to me, this just reflects how controlling he was and the amount of control he had over her.
Go ahead.
And the idea that the only acceptable answer is to completely agree with whatever it is he's saying.
Okay. And there were also discussions about money, correct?
Yeah, he told her also to get, it was a big sum, $60,000 from a loan he'd made her take out, and that she needed to tell her parents to give him that money. And she said, what are you going to use the money for? And he said, why are you questioning me? And she said, because I can know what you want to do with my money. And he said, no. He said, why are you asking me that question? Are you doubting me? She said, I'm starting to doubt you because this, was a few months into jail. And he went on a long tirade that I didn't document in full, but basically he called her dumb, told her not to talk to her mom anymore, said every time you talk to your mom you get pear-shaped and stupid. She at one point tried to interrupt and said, and he said, no, there's nothing else with you need to change.
Okay. And there were several more phone calls that you listened to regarding that?
Yeah, at one point he told her, it's a little ironic because he told her that under no circumstances was she to represent him as being controlling or manipulative to anyone. They were talking about her defense, and I don't remember his exact words, and I didn't put them in my report, but it was basically like, you will not, represent me that way. You will not do that. And it's like him controlling her to say that he's not controlling. Yeah.
You would agree with me based on some of the other phone calls that you listened to that that he was also kind and sweet to her and that kind of thing?
Yeah, even in these same phone calls, when she was completely agreeing with him, she would get very reinforced for that. Or sometimes a phone call would start out just kind of like any relationship, like, hi sweetie, I miss you, how are you? But the second that she would not be 100% compliant, then there'd be pressure and control until she was compliant again. And then once she was compliant again, he would say really like warm, nice things, or if she'd share something, he'd say, oh, that really makes me happy that you got to, like she shared a book she read. And he said, that makes me really happy that you enjoyed that book. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. Yeah, he knew how to be kind.
Okay. Did you find it, were you surprised that after she was incarcerated that she continued this contact with him?
No, it's pretty typical in an abusive relationship and in a cult, and so certainly in both, that it's not just a quick separation, that there's a continued connection.
Okay. And you'd agree with me that a jail is not a therapeutic environment, correct?
It is not.
Okay. And that, to the best of your knowledge, the only thing that Ms. Driver was receiving during her incarceration was medication, correct?
Medication, and what they call counseling is like short, every few weeks, short little visits, pretty much basically to make sure people are suicidal. So it's not the kind of counseling that will bring about like therapeutic change. It's just to like, you know,
And based on your
see who needs to go to, sorry,
No, that's okay,
to
go
see
ahead.
if anyone needs to go to Suicide Watch.
Okay. Based on your professional experience, it didn't surprise you one way or another that she was still communicating with Mr. Ben Michael?
No.
All right. And that you would agree with me that just strictly putting her on medication and not providing the additional therapy or anything else is part of the reason why this continued?
I think so, yeah. In my professional opinion, she would need a lot more treatment to get past this relationship.
So just removing the physical nature of that relationship doesn't necessarily break that bond, is what I'm hearing.
Right.
Okay. Based on your interviews with Chloe and any of your collateral sources, was it clear to you that Chloe loved her child?
Yes.
Okay. Did she express to you that she never wanted to hurt her child?
Yes.
Okay. And that was also kind of corroborated by the additional information that you had to consider in this particular case, correct?
Yes, there wasn't any information that suggested that she ever wanted to hurt her child.
Okay. And you also had the opportunity to watch Dr. Garrett's testimony, correct?
I did.
You had also been given both of her reports that she had done subsequent to yours, correct?
Yes.
All right. You essentially would agree with me that both of you diagnosed her with the same type of disorders, correct?
We did.
Okay, minus the cannabis use one.
Right.
Okay. And, you know, you were able to, you would agree with her when she said that there's, you know, the difference between crazy, mentally ill, and insane, correct?
Right.
All right. Is there anything about Dr. Garrett's reports that you take issue with?
We were pretty much on the same page that Ms. Driver was severely mentally ill and delusional. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about delusions, okay? Going back to that briefly. You've told us that a delusion is a fixed false belief.
Yeah.
Okay, and that it is a fixed false belief that is just not true.
It's not true, and yet someone believes it is true the way that I believe I'm sitting here right now. Yeah.
Okay. And the delusional compulsion is when someone acts upon that false belief, correct?
Right.
Okay. And when someone is acting upon that delusion or false belief, is it because they believe it to be true?
Yes.
Okay. Are they acting on that delusional belief because it is the right thing to do in their mind?
Yeah, in their mind, it's true the same way that I believe it's true that when you ask me a question, I should answer it here, and you guys will hear what I say. Like that, it's that. So that's the right thing for me to do right now, and so I'm doing it. That's acting on a delusional compulsion. It's just doing what you perceive to be true and right.
So the person acting under delusion believes in their mind that that false thing not only is true, but it's the right thing to do in their mind.
Right.
Okay. If someone believes that this false idea or delusion is true, is it possible that they may not understand that that's right or wrong?
Not just possible, but that's kind of the nature of a delusion, is that they believe it to be true. So if I believe it to be true and right, I don't think it's wrong.
Okay.
If my delusion clears up later, I might see it differently. But in the throes of the delusion, which is the belief, I believe it to be right. Yeah.
In this particular case, you have testified, along with Dr. Garrett, that Ms. Driver suffered from these delusions not only in her adolescence, but that they were present in the time leading up to December the 8th of 2020, correct?
Correct.
All right, and you'd agree with me that those delusions, by her report and what the resources that you reviewed, indicated that those delusions got worse.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
particularly the fall of 2020.
Okay,
Yeah.
and what was the lack of medication and treatment over time what kind of exacerbated those delusions, those thoughts and those compulsions?
I mean, part of it is lack of treatment. Treatment would have helped. Part of it was she was living in a really stressful, abusive environment. That would make her mental health decline.
Okay. And, you know, over time, based on your review of all the materials, it became clear to you that she resisted those delusions, correct?
Right.
And those compulsions?
Yes, she was scared of them. Was afraid that she wouldn't be able to like differentiate them from reality unless she got help. So she was trying to get help because she was really afraid about these thoughts she was having that sometimes she believed were true.
May I have a moment?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions at this time, Dr. Ballard. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is court counsel. Good afternoon, doctor. How are you?
Hi. Well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Did you have a good lunch?
Thanks. Yeah, I did.
Who'd you go to lunch with?
Myself.
Did you talk to defense counsel during the break?
I did.
Did y'all talk about your testimony?
Say again.
Did you talk to defense counsel?
During lunch?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Did y'all talk about your testimony, what you were saying, what you were going to say?
A little bit, yeah.
What'd y'all talk about?
Talked about in the course of my career as a forensic psychologist, these not guilty by reason of insanity trials I refer to, or we psychologists refer to as mental status at the time of the offense cases. And I was talking about how I'm like not supposed to talk about my opinion on
That's right. There's a rule of
mental
evidence
status
says you
of
can't
offense.
talk about, so I'm not asking you about that.
Right, I know. But I was talking about how that rule of evidence wasn't always the case. So I need to
You have to change styles a little bit, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, because I'm so used to just talking about that. And so now I'm like trying to choose my words and not, you know.
That's true. I'm sorry, you did go to lunch with them or you didn't?
No, I got lunch on my own, and then I talked to them after I ate.
Well, Doctor, what I'd like to do is, you have a long conversation with Ms. Trethewey and Mr. Kessler, and just for the record, these are exceptional attorneys. They're also nice people, right?
I think so,
yes?
yeah.
I mean, they're not mean to you or anything like that, are they?
No,
I mean, they're reasonable,
they're
right?
professionals. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is try to I'd like to reason with you and talk through some of the things that you didn't say or didn't highlight when it came to the evaluation of the defendant. You think that's fair?
Sure,
Will you agree with me that when you're in a courtroom setting, that there are sides?
yes.
You agree that I'm biased?
Well, you have a job to do as an attorney.
Right, I'm an advocate, right?
Yeah.
So I represent a side, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can understand that if I can get after it or ask questions, they're designed because Hannah, the victim in the case, is kind of who I represent in many ways. You understand that's just kind of normal, right?
Yes, it is, yeah. Courtroom process is adversarial, but experts don't have sides. We're not advocates. Like what I advocate for is my
Doctor,
opinion.
there's not a question in front of you for that. It wasn't a question from her. She's just getting a narrative.
All right. Rephrase.
Doctor, my question is, yes or no, you understand that there are sides to this, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I know you want to give explanations, or that's fair, and the defense can redirect you. My questions are really designed, so if I ask a question, and just try to stay within that. Is that okay?
As long as I feel like I can honestly answer the question with a yes or no.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And you agree that the defense, they have sides, is that right?
correct.
And they represent the defendant in this case, right?
Yes,
And you agree that the court is neutral in the sense that the chief judge controls the courtroom, right?
yes,
And you agree that the jury is separate from all of us, and they are supposed to be objective and just base their decision on the facts and the evidence. Is that right?
I believe that is correct, yes.
And you agree with me that when we have witnesses, oftentimes those witnesses are kind of entitled, the state's witness, right?
I'm sorry, say it again.
The state can have witnesses, and they're
Oh.
usually kind of entitled or named state's witnesses, correct?
Yes.
And the defense can have witnesses, and they're entitled or named defense witnesses,
Yes.
right? And sometimes you can have experts that are third-party neutral. They're not the state's witness, they're not the defense witness, they're kind of more of neutral, staying out. The court may say, I'm going to get a third-party witness, expert to come in and testify. So there's party witnesses, and then there's kind of more of the neutral, objective witnesses, right?
Well, like, yes, although, again, I feel like it's misrepresenting witnesses as advocates. Like, if an expert witness is hired by one side or the other, you're representing as if that would change their opinion, and that's not how we operate.
But you agree you're being paid through the defense, right?
Well, although I'm being paid through the defense, I'm being paid for my time, not for my opinion. And if my opinion had been something that benefited you all, then I'd probably be paid for my time by you. So,
I'm sorry. My question is, you're being paid by the defense, yes or no?
yes, this is my job.
I think I want to go back and start by talking about some of your background. Have you heard the term or the concept worldview?
Of course.
Of course, a worldview is a view that people kind of hold through their education, their upbringing, their life experiences, how they view the world, right?
Yes.
I guess?
Yes.
And another way to say it, whether it's in psychology, philosophy, or the law, sometimes we talk about that they have presuppositions, right?
Yes.
And you agree with me that oftentimes, whether it's in a courtroom or in a clinical session, it's important to know the person's worldview or presuppositions, or just kind of how they view the world, right?
I don't know, because I haven't really noticed people's worldviews being talked about in court.
But their culture is important, right?
I mean, our cultures are important, but again, I haven't really heard them talked about in court.
And in psychology, culture is something that you have to pay attention to or know something about, correct?
Yes,
And I know you live in North Carolina now,
I do.
and do you practice there in North Carolina?
I do.
And where are you from originally?
I was born and raised in Los Angeles.
And where'd you graduate from high school? In Los Angeles?
Yes.
And after you graduated from high school, I think you would consider yourself a creative person.
Yes,
Are you familiar with Myers-Briggs?
I am.
Personality types and things
Yeah.
like that? And do you know what type of personality you are?
I do, although I have to say the Myers-Briggs is not like a standardized psychological
I'm not
test.
asking that, I'm
It's
just
pop
asking.
psychology.
Are you familiar with it?
Yeah,
Okay, what type are you?
INFJ.
Okay, and let's say someone can be intuitive, is that right?
I think I is introverted.
Right, intuitive's down the road a little bit, right?
I don't
Feelings,
remember what they
intuitive, things
stand
like
for. I took it like 30 years ago.
Sure,
Yeah.
but some people are more of a feeler, is that correct? Generally speaking, I'm not saying
yeah.
psychologically speaking.
Yeah,
Some people are more of a thinker, right?
yeah. I believe I was like, actually, I'm both.
Right, so an engineer may be a thinker, just like systems and things like that, right?
Yeah,
Someone that's in sociology, psychology, oftentimes people go into those type of work because they feel for people or they have the concern or compassion. Is that true?
that can be someone's motivation.
Now, according to the website ballardphd.com, your superpower is thrifting. Is that right?
That's a website that doesn't have anything to do with my therapy practice or my forensic practice. Yeah, I love to thrift shop.
Okay, my question, Doctor, was, according to that website, your superpower is thrifting, correct?
Yes,
And also, according to that website, you're addicted to coffee and salad. Is that right?
yes, I just had a salad for lunch.
And also, your creative obsession is surface pattern design, right?
Yes,
And you, when asked to choose between the forest or the woods and the beach, you prefer the forest, correct?
yes,
Even though you grew up close to the beach, is that right?
yes. Does that make this
And
matter?
then on sessionsync.com, you listed that you were a drummer in a post-punk band. Is that right?
I don't know what session sync is, but I was a drummer in several post-punk bands.
A cellist at one point,
Still am.
and floral designer at another point.
Did the weddings for both my stepdaughters.
You were a painter,
I still paint.
knitter,
Still knit.
jewelry maker,
Yeah, on and off.
mixed media art,
Still do that.
and you do have an online presence to some degree, don't you?
A little bit.
You have a little bit of tech savvy.
Well, I hire someone for that.
Now, in your undergraduate degree and studies, you went to school in Los Angeles, is that right?
Yes,
Occidental College, is that correct?
yes,
It was 1990 that you graduated,
yes,
and you had a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, is that
Yes.
right? Not psychology, not business, but political science, right?
yes.
Is that something that interested you at the time?
Yeah, at the time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to law school or clinical psychology.
I would recommend not going to law school. So,
I don't know. You haven't been in my shoes.
during your undergraduate degree, now most people that have gone to college, the undergraduate is kind of not as focused as maybe grad school or doctorate level studies. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Did you study any of the Greek philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great? Did you study any of those?
Probably, I don't remember.
But not fair to say, not much.
Not much.
Political philosophers like John Marx, John Stuart Mills, Karl Marx,
Yes.
because that's more of the political science side.
Yes.
How about the existential philosophers like Nietzsche, Heidegger, Sartre?
I had a class on existentialism.
Okay,
One
but not much,
class,
right?
Yeah.
How about the religious philosophy? Francis Bacon, Immanuel Kant, Soren Kierkegaard.
I'm sure they were covered in some courses, but I mean, I didn't study them in depth. I'm no specialist.
Would it be an accurate statement to say that out of all the philosophy, it was not the religious philosophies you studied?
Yes.
No study in world religions really in undergraduate.
Right.
No studies in comparative religions in undergraduate.
Right.
No really study of theology or anything like that. No studies in the cults or occults.
No.
There's a term in theology when you look at world religions, when you look at different religions or makeups of different religions, it's called syncretism. Are you familiar with the term syncretism?
I have not.
Are you familiar with the word just to synchronize or to,
Yes.
and based on your knowledge and training and education, just your world experience, syncretism, that could be something where people take certain things from different religions and kind of amalgamate them or put them into a belief system?
I don't know.
And that's because you haven't really studied religion much in your career, right?
I'm not familiar with that word.
But how about in graduate school? Really same level, not really studying any of these philosophies or religion or anything
That
like
wasn't part of clinical psychology.
Okay. Same thing in your doctorate degree in 1999. During that time, you really focused on psychology or things like that.
Yes.
Did you get any specialty certificates for psychology while you were at school, in graduate school, your doctorate degree?
Besides my degree.
Yes, ma'am. You can get certificates or specializations in psychology, right?
Oh, you can now. When I was in school in the 90s, forensic psychology was only a postdoctoral specialty. There weren't even courses, let alone whole programs in it. It was something you had to study after your doctorate. So, no, I didn't get any certificates. I don't remember any even being available.
But since you graduated, there have been certain things or specialties or certificates you could obtain in psychology. Is that fair?
Well, by then I had already graduated, so I didn't.
Let me repeat my question.
need it.
Since you graduated, if you had chosen to, you could have got a specialty or certificate in psychology, correct?
I don't even understand what you mean by certificate. There are all kinds of certificates you can pay money to get, or take a continuing education class and get a certificate. So, I probably have gotten some of those from continuing education classes. I have no idea.
What is the ABPP?
Oh, okay. I think I get what you're talking about now.
I think you do.
It's not a certificate. The American Board of Professional Psychology is an organization. They're probably a nonprofit. I don't know. And they grant, it's called a board certification. That's what it's called. So you can be board certified in forensic psychology. And it's not required. In fact, Dr. Garrett isn't. My husband is, but I'm not. So.
All right, here's my question.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to try to ask
I am familiar with ABPP. That was your question, right?
Yes, that was my question.
Yes, I'm familiar with them.
All right, the ABPP is a professional organization that actually you can go through and get either more training or recognition as a more specialist in forensic psychology, correct?
Correct.
In other words, isn't it true that if you have psychologists that deal with clinical or counseling, but if you really want to specialize, you can and have the ability to get more study and training to specifically focus on forensic psychology?
That I have done.
But you don't have a certificate from them or anything like that, correct?
Besides the board certification, they don't offer certificates for their courses.
Okay. Do you have the board certification?
No.
So you don't put your name, like after your initials, you put your PhD, but you do not put ABPP, correct?
Correct.
That's because if you get the ABPP certification, it's more of a title that you can show that you have either more training or maybe more experience, right?
It's kind of a feather in your cap. Yeah.
You're not downplaying. It is a significant thing you can do to actually.
Oh, yeah. When my husband got it, we totally celebrated. Yeah.
And forensic psychology, if you took the genus or if you took the overall category of psychology, just the big box up here, you got psychology, and then you got some tracks where people are clinical psychologists and they do more of the counseling or the clinical side, right?
Yes.
And then you've got some that can go and do more of the forensic side where it's applied more so in courts.
Actually, that's not accurate. Only clinical psychologists can be forensic psychologists. So if you've got psychologists, and then some are clinical psychologists and some are experimental, and then under clinical psychologists, you can do forensic psychology, you can do therapy, you can do assessment. So all forensic psychologists are by definition clinical psychologists because you have to have a license in clinical psychology to practice forensic psychology. Forensic is a subspecialty.
All right. So you would agree that psychology or clinical psychology is different, whatever degree you call it, is different than forensic psychology.
Forensic psychology is a subset of clinical psychology. So they're different in that all forensic psychologists are clinical psychologists, but not all clinical psychologists are forensic psychologists.
And if somebody was not a forensic psychologist, they did not operate under understanding the laws of Georgia as applied to mental issues in criminal cases. That person that doesn't deal with that or have any experience with that, they are not the ones that usually do that. They're usually doing something like counseling or clinical, correct?
Right.
Doctor, going through, I've got your CV, looked at that, but when you go through that, I want to begin with talking about some of your professional background. In Georgia, the last place you worked at, what was the name of that, firm or entity?
Forensic Specialty Group.
And when you work there on your letterhead, that's actually for your report, it actually has about 4 people listed on the top of the letterhead. Is that right?
6.
Okay, now, in the
I don't know if
report
it
I
doesn't
have,
matter.
how many do you have at the top?
I've got 6 names.
Okay, is Kevin Richards one?
Yes,
He has a PhD, is that right?
yes,
And then after his initials, he is certified or recognized by the ABPP, correct?
yes,
And then I think Christina Gleiser, a
Gleiser.
PhD, and also recognized by ABPP, is that right?
yes,
And then you're on there, is that correct?
yes,
And you have your PhD, is that right?
yes.
And then this is a firm that did a lot of forensic psychology, is that correct?
That's all they do.
Okay. They're specialized in that, right?
Yes.
And they're so specialized that that's kind of really limited to their expertise, is that right?
No, in fact, Kevin Richards has done therapy and forensic psychology, and then he owns the practice. And then the other people, including me, are contractors, and because we're contractors and not employees, we're required to have other work. And so, one person's other work is doing therapy with adolescents. One person's other work is doing risk assessments. I mean, yeah, we do all kinds of things. But in forensic specialty group, we only do forensic psychology.
And if there was a box, and that box was forensic psychology, everybody in that firm is doing forensic psychology, right?
When they're doing a case assigned to them by FSG, yes.
Right. Now, at the firm, they would do things like types of evaluations, competency to stand trial, correct?
Yes.
Competency to waive rights under Miranda, right? Criminal responsibility or mental state at the time of offense, right?
Yes.
Transfer of juvenile defendants to or from adult court, right?
Yes.
Diminished capacity or diminished responsibility or mitigation, correct?
Yes.
Sentencing, including aggravation and mitigation in cases.
Yes.
Psychosexual evaluation or sexual violence risk assessments, right?
Yes.
Violence risk assessments, correct?
Yes.
Parenting, fitness capacity, and child protection cases, right?
Yes.
These are things not only that they do, but they advertise. These are the services that they can provide when it comes to evaluations. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, how many of you, for you when you worked there, how many of those type of things did you do for an attorney?
There were several things on the list you just read that I don't do.
Okay.
Sexual violence risk assessments I don't do. I can't remember. There are a few. I did most but not all of those things, and that's generally true for forensic psychologists. They're just not trained, or they don't want to do like every single thing.
Now, those things I just listed there, how many of those did you do? I'm going to talk about you. How many of those did you do? And those were for a criminal attorney and a civil attorney.
All of the things you listed were all criminal,
Okay.
and
So-
the things I did for civil attorneys weren't on that list.
Okay, so the things that I just listed are advertised. You agree with me that most of those are done for a criminal attorney.
Yes.
And how many of those were done for, say, a private attorney versus a public, like a government attorney? How are the ones that you've done?
I don't. Do you mean public defense versus private attorney, or?
Right, so private attorneys, out of all the things that you've done that we've talked about, that you've
Yeah.
done for criminal attorneys, how many of those that you've done were for private attorneys?
I don't know. We got a healthy mix of public defense offices sending us cases and private attorneys sending us. I don't know. I think it trended a little bit more towards the public defense office, but I honestly don't know.
And by public defense, you mean like a public defender or indigent defense, someone that's on the defense side, right?
Yes.
It would be that side of the courtroom, not the prosecutor's side of the courtroom.
Right.
Now, how many of those that we talked about that you did, you've done for a prosecutor?
Well, like I talked about earlier, none, because the prosecutors don't call us because they use the DB. I'm sorry, the
department.
Yeah, they use the
Health.
department. Yeah. So prosecutors just don't call the group practice, and that's how it was in Oregon too. Like prosecutors they use the state psychologists.
Do you understand in the state of Georgia that prosecutors actually can use private experts?
Yes, and I had forgotten that because I hadn't ever gotten any until my husband reminded me just the other day, and he said, "Oh no, they can, but they tend to call the same couple people, and it's never us. So we can't control who calls us."
On a whole, you agree with me that the majority of your evaluations that you've done as you worked at this firm would be for criminal defense attorneys.
Right.
All right, let's talk about the types of expert consultation that your firm did. They could do things like research and prepare briefs regarding psychological issues,
Yes.
assist with cross-examination of expert witnesses is on the website.
That wasn't ever anything that I did. That is more something that Dr. Richards and well, on here it says Dixon, but her name's different now, that they do in military courts.
And
It's not something I've ever done.
And fair to say that your colleagues there at the firm that you work for, that those would be helping the defense prepare to cross-examine a government expert, right?
No, they get hired equally in the military on both sides.
Do you know the percentage of which would be for the defense and which would be for the government?
I don't, but since my husband does those, sorry, my husband is Dr. Richards, so just so I'm talking about the same person. I could flip a coin. I don't know. It's like defense or prosecution. I don't. It's both. It's all the time.
Sure, but you agree your he's not an expert in this case or relevant to this case?
No, I'm just saying that the people at Forensic Specialty Group who do consulting on cross-examination work for the defense and the prosecution. I'll stop talking about
Now, most of the income that you made at that firm and the firm made, a lot of that significant portion of that will have come from defense attorneys, is that right?
Yes.
And as you've gone through your career, I noticed that in your CV that you worked in places like Portland, Oregon, is that right?
Yes.
And you did that and you would do things in mitigation of sentence, is that right?
Yes.
Actually, on your CV you have mitigation of sentence, is that right?
Yes.
And that mitigation is to take a defendant that's being sentenced and trying to show mitigation or lesser reason they should be punished and should be punished less severe, correct?
Well, that's the attorney's goal. Yes.
I mean, that's what mitigation means, right?
Well, mitigating factors probably mean something a little bit different to me as a psychologist.
Fair to say you're not testifying on the side of the prosecution in mitigation, right?
In civil cases, I might have, but I don't remember.
Right. Prosecution's not a civil case, so we're in criminal, correct?
Oh, I mean plaintiff and defense, yeah. But for prosecution, no. They didn't hire me.
Let me talk to you about your professional training and presentations. In your CV, you listed some training. You did 2023 consultation testifying cases with child victims, is that right?
Yes.
And was that by any certain organization?
I don't know. If it's on my CV? It's probably the AAFP, which is run by the ABPP, which you were asking me about. Yeah.
2019 ethics and multiple relationships, is that right?
If it's on my CV, then yeah. I don't
2019 forensic evaluation and disability matters.
Like I said, I don't have my CV memorized, so if it's on there, then sure.
If I'm going off your CV, would you have any reason to doubt that I've
No.
misrepresented?
No.
2019 recreational drug use in forensic settings, correct?
Okay.
2016 providing psychological consultations in homicides.
Okay.
These are from yours. These are the ones that you put down.
Okay.
Was that for a prosecution or defense in those?
Either. If it says consultation, what does it say again?
Providing psychological consultation in homicides?
Yeah, that would just be consulting about homicides. They don't teach it to either side.
2013, you did malingering forensic psychological evaluations. Familiar with that one?
If it's on my CV, again.
Now, in some of your presentations, you did a 2014 presentation in cross-examination of a psychological testimony. Did you teach that? Did you present that?
Oh, I gave a 1-hour talk on that.
Okay, was that to defense attorneys?
No, it was to civil attorneys.
Plaintiff's attorneys.
It was to plaintiff's attorneys.
And plaintiff's attorneys are people that sue people for money and things like that?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with oftentimes defense attorneys also are plaintiff's attorneys?
I don't know.
But in that, you gave a presentation on, I guess, how to handle cross-examinations.
Yes.
Kind of, this is what to expect and this is what you should do or how you should answer questions type thing?
Yes, crafting questions that will make sense to us.
And then you've done other things. You've done other presentations. But my question when it comes to training presentations, is it fair to say that your audience have not been police officers or anything like that?
I'm trying to think if I gave any presentations to law enforcement. The reason why I'm having trouble remembering is because I did do some public safety stuff with a colleague of mine, but I don't think that I gave presentations.
Set that one aside if it's just one time.
It wasn't just one time, but it was like, I don't even know if it's how relevant. I had a colleague in police and public safety, and
Here's my
okay.
question. Your training and teaching presentations that you do, they're not to things like the victims and the family of the victims, or victim advocates, or prosecutors, or police officers, or investigators, things like that. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I'm not positive, but I think so.
Now, sometimes I like on cross-examination with experts, I like to ask them, you got your phone with you today?
No.
You have your laptop or your phone, wherever it's at. If I would ask you if you would have more contacts in your phone or your computer, or your contact, would there be more defense-oriented contacts than, say, prosecutor contacts?
It's hard to say. I haven't had any forensic referrals in a couple of years. So right now, there aren't a whole lot of attorneys on my contact list.
I want to now turn to another topic, testifying as an expert. What is the total, I need specifics. What's the total number of times in your career that you've testified as an expert?
I don't know exactly. I know it's dozens.
What does dozens mean? Are you saying 24 or more than that?
No, more than that.
Okay.
Less than 100. I have not been keeping track. Yeah.
Doctor, I assume every time you testify for an expert, you got paid. Is that right?
Yes.
So there has to be a log of something where you would keep a detailed record of how many times you have testified as an expert. Would that be fair?
Well, there'd be an invoice, but there's also invoices for evaluations and reports. So I mean,
Is it closer to 50 or closer to 100?
give me a minute because I'm going to do some averages in my head. Closer to 100.
All right. And has there ever been a time when you have not been qualified, where a court has said you're not qualified as an expert?
No.
Tell me the number of times in the last 5 years that you've testified in court, not at a deposition, not at a hearing, but at a jury trial, that you've testified as an expert and a judge has certified you, deemed you an expert.
In the past 5 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me think. Maybe 8.
And how many of those were criminal?
All of them.
And where were those at?
Georgia. In different counties, I don't remember.
And how many of those were murder cases?
I don't. Not all of them. Not even most of them. I don't know if any of them were. I don't remember.
And how many of those were during the guilt stage, not sentencing, but the actual guilt?
I don't recall.
How many times have you been deemed an expert in forensic, not psychology generally, not general psychology or testifying about counseling, but forensic psychology in the last 5 years?
All those times.
And all those times that you've been called, were you called by a defense attorney?
Yes.
Now I want to talk about your focus, that's your standard focus. I think you left practice in 2021 from here in Georgia, is that right?
I think that at the end of 2021 is when I stopped taking new referrals.
And towards the end of the year of 2021?
Yes.
After you did your evaluation, your meetings in this case?
Yes.
All right, now, since then, you got on several websites, is it fair to say that you're now online therapy for creatives who are overwhelmed, anxious, and depressed? Is that your focus now?
Yeah, that's my therapy practice.
And your specialties, as you advertise or as talked about online, is it accurate to say that you work with creative professionals and artists who are burning themselves out, and that you're accepting, warm, and perceptive?
Those are words from my website.
Now, on your website, specifically ballardphd.com, there's, under the personal view tab, do you remember saying that many therapists thinks it's not okay to share their personal views, but that's just not me?
Yes.
And then you go on to say, you give your personal views, and one of the things you say is, I am a defender of social justice. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And then you also talked about, in that same, where you're giving your personal views, that your personal work recognizing my own privilege and working through, quote, my own latent biases is challenging, lifelong, and humbling.
That is something that, yes.
And so you agree that everyone has a bias in some way or degree.
We all do.
Now, you also say on that website, I believe, as a therapist, I pay attention to the impact of systemic injustice. Is that something you pay attention to?
As a therapist, yes.
Now, some of you advertise that some of your things that you expertise are things like burnout, grief, life transitions, mood disorders, relationship issues, self-esteem, trauma and post-traumatic stress issues, PTSD, women's issues, open relationships, non-monogamy. Those are some of your expertise that you advertise, right?
That isn't on my website. That sounds like something from a therapist directory.
Okay. Are those things that you do focus on?
Those are referrals I would take that I can work with, but it's not something that I would advertise on my website because that's a lot. Yeah.
Is it objective to say that one of your specialties now is not forensic psychology?
Well, in my therapy practice, it's not. That would be inappropriate.
And I think you testified on direct that you're no longer really doing forensic psychology, except I think you said here today.
From the cases I took through to 2021, once all those close out, I won't have any open forensic cases. I still am doing continuing education because I'm taking a break, but I'm not sure, when I'll want to start taking more evaluations on.
I want to move to a different topic now. I want to talk about your knowledge or your worldview of what you understand, whatever concept term you want to give it, about the what you call the cult that the defendant was in. And I'm not going to battle you over whether it's a cult or not a cult.
Okay.
I'm not arguing over that. Whatever term you give the religious group that they're in. fair to say that when you look at that, do you know anything about 508c1a trust or anything like that?
No,
Do you know anything about 501c trust? Is a charitable trust, just general charity. If I told you that 508c is more of a religious trust, would you have any reason to disagree with me?
I
on
have
that?
no idea.
And fair to say you didn't really go into that with the defendant and ask her about trust and things like that?
We didn't talk about that at all.
Didn't really go into details about her and the group trying to get a house through that or try to get money through that?
We didn't talk about that at all.
Did you talk about, she tell you about any schemes about or plans to get money to avoid IRS or to get a house or anything through a trust?
No, there was something about trying to get a house, but that was the extent of it.
Okay.
So,
Fair to say that under this 508c1a, you don't know that they can get a IRS employee identification number, EIN, excuse me?
like I said, I don't know anything about 508, whatever.
You don't know anything about this group's teachings or studies, right?
Only what I've heard from reading from this case, reading information and what Chloe said.
Don't know anything about their sermons or writings, correct?
Correct.
Nothing about their philosophy or theology, correct?
Again, only what I've learned from this case.
And did you learn in this case that when she was arrested in her bag, not only was there CBD, but there was a Bible?
I didn't know that.
Did you know they used a Bible?
It doesn't surprise me because a lot of the terminology around it is biblical.
But fair to say you don't know much about their culture, right?
Right.
Yes.
Dr. I'm handing you the DSM-5-TR. May I hand that to you?
Sure.
Go ahead and just look at that for a second. I'm going to ask you some questions from that, but first what I want to do is ask you about, this is, and I don't know if you use the term, but some people use that this is the Bible of psychology or this is a learned treatise.
I've heard that term before.
Would you agree with me that the DSM-5 is a book that's relied upon by not just forensic psychologists, but clinical psychologists and people, psychiatrists all over the world?
Yes.
It is a learned treatise, right?
Yes.
It's a scholarly book or has lots of knowledge.
Yes.
All right. And the DSM-5, that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, right?
Yes.
And it took about 12 years to prepare the DSM-5, but then I think 2021 they came along and did text revision. Is that fair?
I don't remember the exact year, but yeah.
What version did you use when you were evaluating the defendant in this case?
Trying to see if I said it in my report. It was either 5 or 5 TR. I don't.
Right, and they're basically the same, the 5 and the TR, right?
That's why I can't remember
Right.
because yeah.
Well, you agree with me that this manual, as it states on page, you can turn to page 21 if you want, but the primary purpose is to assist trained clinicians. You know that, right?
Yes.
All right. Maybe it'd help if I just don't. I may turn you to a page in a second here or there, but let's do it this way. The primary purpose of the DSM-5 is to use for clinicians. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. If you turn to page 29 of that, I guess around page 29, but the DSM-5, in your expertise, my expertise is in law. I can't keep up with you in psychology, so you're going to have to help me. But in your world, there is a cautionary aspect, or there's a cautionary aspect that when you use the DSM-5 for something similar to it, that you have to recognize that it's primarily designed to assist clinicians, right?
Yes.
What on page 29, does the DSM-5 actually have a cautionary statement for forensic use?
Yeah, that diagnoses can be misunderstood in forensic situations unless they're explained by a trained clinician. I'm not reading right out of this.
Sorry, but you agree with me that when you're using psychology or the DSM-5, you have to be careful that in a forensic setting, you have to look for some risk and limitations of the DSM-5 or the psychological application, correct?
Yeah, that's why I'm here, so that terms aren't just thrown around and people don't know what they mean.
Because ultimately, when it comes to forensic psychology, that is dealing with psychology that you would have in the DSM-5. So if you have a book, and you have that book there, this is the Georgia Code. So I have another book. You have that book and I have the Georgia Code.
Sure.
If I asked you could not do it. If I asked you to look up in the DSM-5 the Georgia law on insanity, it's not in there, is it?
Right.
It's not in there because insanity and any defense for that, you agree with me, is a question that is controlled by this book, the code.
Insanity is a legal term. The word insanity isn't in here.
Right, you couldn't find it if I asked you to, correct?
Right.
Right, insanity is a question of law that this jury has to decide in this case, right?
Correct.
Not psychology, not the DSM-5. This law applies to the facts of this case that this jury gets to say, right?
Right.
All right, let me ask you about, when you look at some of these things, you talk about schizophrenia and you talk about personality disorders as your opinion of what the defendant holds. Is for academic discussion and for practical discussion, I'm not going to dispute that right at the moment. But when it comes to the schizophrenia, it's kind of a spectrum, isn't it?
By spectrum, I mean, people have it in different degrees. Like, someone could have schizophrenia with only mild symptoms, and some people have really severe symptoms that are really resistant to treatment. So if that's what you mean by spectrum, then yes.
And under the DSM-5, the book that you have in front of you, there are other mental disorders in this book, correct?
Yes.
There's lots of them, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's things like mental disorders that you have in the book. You have anxiety disorder, fear of injections or shots, correct?
Yes.
You have hoarding as a mental disorder, correct?
Okay. Is it?
You can turn to page 273 and see what's there.
I haven't had any hoarders in a while.
It's 273.
I don't see it on body dysmorphic disorders on 273.
You don't see it there in 273?
273 is about body dysmorphic disorder.
Okay,
But anyway, I mean,
if we go back, I'll find a second here. Post-traumatic stress disorder?
that's in here, yeah.
Okay. Binge eating disorders?
Yes,
Insomnia disorders?
I believe so.
Sleep apnea?
Is that in the DSM?
See if I got this page right. Look at
memorized,
page 429.
Oh, sleep apnea, yeah.
How about 464, restless leg syndrome?
Yes.
All right, just these others. Alcohol intoxication, you agree with me that these are also caffeine-related disorders, cannabis use disorders, tobacco use disorders. These are all types of mental disorders under DSM-5.
Yes.
Then there's other things or condition or problems that you have to focus on, and part of that is religious or spiritual problems. Is that correct?
I believe so, but
Turn to page
like I said, I
834.
don't have this memorized.
834.
834. Oh, yeah, okay.
And you agree with me that when you're doing the DSM-5 or trying to apply a psychological opinion, that the manual says that when it comes to questioning of spiritual values that may not necessarily be related to an organized church or religious institution, you have to take that in consideration, that it could be a religious group that's outside of mainstream, right?
Right,
And it's important to know that when you're giving a psychological opinion. You agree with that, wouldn't you?
yes.
And you don't know anything about their religious teachings or spiritualism, do you?
I know, like I said, I know what I've learned in this case from what all the records and information say and what she told me.
The DSM and what you're supposed to do when you do an evaluation, especially if somebody's not mainstream, there's something called the Cultural Formation Interview, CFI, correct?
Yes.
And that's something you can take into consideration, their religion, spirituality, and when you look at the group or the individual, they use these things to fashion their own identities and sense of experience, right?
Are you reading to me from a certain page?
I'm asking you, as a psychologist, you would have to consider those things, correct?
In a therapy relationship?
In using the DSM-5.
In diagnosing someone that I was seeing for therapy, yes.
You agree with me that context and things matter when you're looking at a person's and their, whether or not they're telling you something that's true or not true?
Yes.
And part of that is you have to consider the words that they use.
Yes.
And that word may be, like if somebody could say insane, and they may mean that term to be I'm insane, but not in a legal sense or a psychological sense. So it could just be an idiom they use, right?
Yeah, it's used in daily language often.
And the particulars of what a word is used by someone, including the defendant, you have to figure out, are they meaning I'm crazy or delusion in the same sense that you would mean as a psychologist, correct?
Right.
But the DSM-5, it recognizes this, and it talks about cultural idioms, right?
It does.
And if you look at page 874 for me. Because when you're evaluating someone's psychosis, you have to consider the words and the things that they're using. And some cultures have different ways of saying things. Are you familiar with the term ataque de nervos?
Attack of nerves.
Right.
That's what it means.
How about on page 876, there's the maladie de Yab. It's literally the devil or Satan illness found in Haitian cultures.
Right.
So there's things like voodoo, witch doctors, things like that. Even happen here in the United States, right?
Yes.
And so how they view the world may be strange or weird or delusional in some ways to the average person, but if they believe it, that could be a genuine belief that they hold, correct?
Right.
And you need to understand that the culture in order to give a diagnosis, right?
It's one important part of giving a diagnosis, yes.
Right. If you look on page 124 of the DSM-5, there it talks about the cultural and socioeconomic factors that must be considered. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And there, do you see where it says that cultural and socioeconomic factors must be considered, particularly when the individual and the clinician do not share the same cultural and economic background, right?
Right.
And the idea there is that you need to mitigate the impact of a clinician's bias, right?
Right.
So I want to turn now to something that you didn't talk about with the defense. If you turn to page 835 of the Bible, if you would, of the DSM.
835.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
This is discussing malingering, correct?
Oh, here, yes.
You agree with me that when you're in a context of a clinical setting, a person can come in and be the historian for their facts and what happened to them. That happens often, right?
Yes.
And when you're in a forensic setting, oftentimes when that person comes in to give you a history, they are self-admitting or they are the historian themselves, correct?
Well, the history from the defendant is one piece of information to be compared against a lot of other pieces of information. So yeah, we get our history from that person.
And in your practice, in your field of expertise, and specifically in the DSM-5, you are to strongly consider if somebody is malingering, right?
That's a foundation of forensic psychology, is that there's no forensic evaluation that doesn't take into consideration whether someone might have been malingering. There's even a paragraph in my report about why I thought that Ms. Driver wasn't malingering.
And malingering, like saying ideation is a fancy way to say idea. Malingering is a technical term that means they are faking or lying or exaggerating, correct?
Right, to get some desired outcome, yeah.
You see number 1 under the malingering section there is number medico-legal?
Yeah.
Read that paragraph out loud to something you should consider when it comes to malingering.
Medico-legal context of presentation, e.g. the individual is referred by an attorney to the clinician for examination, or the individual self-refers while litigation or criminal charges are pending.
So off the get-go, if a person is referred to you by an attorney, you should consider that, correct?
Absolutely.
If the person is sitting with charges, you should consider that, correct?
Yes, this is basic forensic psychology.
And if the
101.
person is being evaluated in a criminal setting, you should consider that too, right?
All of those.
Because there is a motive, whether you find it to be true or not. Technically speaking, structurally speaking, you would have to agree with me, would you not, that there is a motive to lie or to malinger?
A motive to what? To malinger?
To lie or
Oh,
malinger.
yes.
Now, one thing you didn't discuss with the defense, and in your report, I think it's around page 12, you did some psychological testing. You actually used a diagnostic or to the best of its ability, objective thing to see if the defendant was malingering or there were issues with her self-reporting or her assessments, right?
Yes.
All right, let's talk about this because the defense didn't ask you about this. But in your report, you used something to test her evaluation or her answers by using something called the MMPI-2-RF, right?
Yes.
And that is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2 restructure form, right?
Right.
That is a 338 true-false test or inventory that is, in this case, the defendant could take to answer certain questions, right?
Right.
Because her evaluation or that thing itself is a self-reporting instrument or self-reporting procedure in many ways, correct?
Right, because she fills it out true or false.
And you did this to see if it had any correspondence to the validity of her scores or her testing, right?
I did what?
You gave her this test to see if she was malingering or if there was any issues with the validity of her test, right?
Of her test?
Of her evaluation.
Oh, her evaluation. That wasn't the only reason. The MMPI is, it measures psychopathology, like symptoms, because it asks a lot about symptoms, but it also measures kind of more stable personality traits. So the only reason to give it's not a malingering test. There are specific malingering tests you can give. This isn't.
You didn't use those tests, right? Malingering tests.
Right.
You chose not to use the malingering.
In this case, her self-report was so consistent with all the other sources of information that I did not use a malingering test.
But she has some over-endorsement of symptoms, right?
Yes.
In fact, you said Ms. Driver produced an invalid MMPI-2-RF profile due to over-endorsement of symptoms, right?
Yes.
And you agree with me that under the MMPI, the manual and the testing itself, that there is a F-R, which is infrequent responses measure, and then you put PF-R, but I think that's actually FP-R, right?
Oh, Probably,
And I do typos all the time, but
Yeah.
there's two categories. There's F-R and PF-R, right?
yes,
And you gave a score of 120 for the F-R and a 99 for the PF-R, right?
I didn't give it, that's a score sheet earned.
Right.
Yeah.
And you agree with me that the MMPI has a kind of a scale that if there is a scale for the FR that's 79 to 99, that there's a possible motivated response.
Possibly, but you'd never interpret test results without looking at all the other information about the case. So yeah, possibly.
And under the MMPI, if there is a score that's above 100 for the F-R, that it's not possible of motivated response or helping out. It is a motivated response, right?
Say that again, sorry.
All right. Under the MMPI, whether or not someone's helping themselves out or motivating in their answers or giving these type of answers, to test the validity, there's a range. 77 to 99, if it's in that range, it's possible that they gave a motivated response, right?
Okay,
Then there's another range, if it's 100 or above, in this case, hers is 120, that it is motivated.
I'm interested in your source for that.
Judge Approach?
Yes.
You can bottom right there.
But where is that from? Like what textbook
manual or some
or
type of-
research article or book?
Yeah, something like that. Would you disagree with me that there is a scale?
Well, what I'm stuck on is that the MMPI.
Well, doctor, let me do it this way.
This is someone's take on it, but the reason why I'm stuck is because the MMPI doesn't tend to talk in terms of definite. So when you say something's definitely the case, that's not usually how we interpret MMPIs.
Let me put it this way. You agree with me that her scores are high
Yes,
and that they are above normal or abnormal, right?
yes,
So you agree with me that maybe not you, but another psychologist could look at her scores and say, yeah, she was trying too hard, right?
although they might have, it would be inconsistent with all the other sources of information. So they might decide that in all those other places she was really not trying hard, she was presenting as herself, but in this place she decided to, exaggerate or something.
So answer to my question is yes, someone could disagree.
Someone could, yeah, sure.
Judge Approach.
Yes.
I'm not gonna give
Yeah.
them back.
No, here.
And the same thing was true with her. You put PF-R, but FP-R.
Yeah.
So there are two, you agree with me that there were two things on some diagnostic where she was scoring abnormally high, right?
She scored invalid, yeah.
All right, let me,
I can explain what that means never mind, sorry.
no, by all means, if you want to explain, go ahead.
The MMPI has validity scales and then it has clinical scales. And you don't look at the clinical scales like the depression scale or whatever unless you make sure that the validity scales are okay. In other words, they took the test without trying to fake good or fake bad or anything. So I didn't interpret any of her clinical scales because her validity scales were all that she over-reported symptoms. And so one possibility for that is if somebody isn't a great reader and they misunderstand items, that they could end up reporting things. And I felt like that probably didn't explain it for her because she reads, you only need to read like an elementary school level for this test. Another possibility is that she was faking and like trying to report a whole bunch of symptoms like in a lying kind of way. And that's possible, like I just said, but she wasn't in every other like interview with me, with other people, in all the other information from police, from witnesses, there wasn't that lying present. So the third possibility for that invalid score is that she is continuing to experience psychotic symptoms and just, it's called a cry for help, is the third option for being invalid, is that you're in distress and you're just endorsing everything because it's like you're in distress, you want help, so you're just like, yeah, like to everything. And so it's not faking bad, like, oh, I want to look really sick because I want, some particular end. It's a cry for help by dramatically endorsing things. And I think she took it that way, and so I didn't want to interpret the clinical scales because it wasn't really an accurate representation. There you go.
Right, that was your opinion on why it was
That's my
invalid.
professional opinion.
And doctor, you agree with me in that second option, the one that says intentionally attempting to present themselves as mentally ill. It's in order to obtain a secondary gain, right?
That's the whole definition of malingering.
So you'd have to concede that in the context of her doing this mental evaluation, she's been arrested for murder, and the secondary gain is not to be found guilty of killing, stabbing to death her own 13-month-old child, right? You'd have to concede that.
I'd have to agree. What am I agreeing to?
You have to concede that. That's one of the options, right?
Oh, it is one of the options.
You just didn't think it was that one.
Nor did Dr. Garrett or Dr. Zom or anyone else, yeah.
Thank you for that, Doctor. But in the end, when you actually interviewed her, you met with her on, I believe, March 29, 2021 and June 12, 2021, right?
Yes.
And you didn't write in your report how long you met with her for those visits. Is that correct?
I didn't put it in the report. It's somewhere in an invoice or something.
And who was present during this interview with you and her? Just the
two of us.
You had the ability to video record it, correct?
I don't think so.
You have the ability to audio record it?
I didn't ask. I've never audio recorded my forensic evaluations.
If you had, we could have heard exactly what she said and how she said it and things like that, right?
Well, although, yeah, I don't know anyone who audio records their forensic evaluations. That's not, you know.
Are you familiar with I think it was the trial in Colorado for the theater shooting? I believe they had about 22 hours or so. Familiar with that trial?
I'm not.
You familiar with Dr. Gurr? Dr. Gurr?
Can you spell it?
I think it's Ghar maybe?
I'm not.
Well, going back to yours, when you interviewed her, did you know who she talked to before her interview? Do you know if she talked to her mom?
I mean, I know she had talked to her mom.
Do you know if she talked to her dad?
I know she had talked to her dad before I met her.
Do you know if she talked to Benjamin?
I know she had talked to Benjamin at some point before I met her.
Do you know if she talked to any of her friends?
If she had friends, I assume she talked to them at some point before I met her. I mean, do you mean like in her whole life?
Before
that
the
day?
interview, from the time she was arrested, in jail, before
Oh,
the
in
interview.
jail. I knew she had talked to her parents. I don't think she told me she talked to friends, and I believe I knew that she had talked.
Doctor, I apologize. That was a terrible question. From the
Mr.
time she was arrested to the
Yeah.
time she was given the interview, before you walked in to do the interview, you didn't really know who she had talked to or what they talked about, right?
I don't remember if I knew or not.
And you don't know what all jail calls she's had or anything to discuss it, correct?
I don't think I knew when I first met her.
Do you know whether or not she had talked to her lawyers before she talked with you?
I know she had talked to her attorneys before she met with me.
Are you familiar with what's called a jailhouse lawyer?
Yes.
Do you know whether or not she talked to anybody else that gave her any legal advice or things to say or not say?
I do not know.
You agree with me, though, that she had the ability to communicate with other people.
Yes.
She had the ability to sit around and talk about her case.
Yes.
And she was around people that could have been sympathetic to her position and where she was in that reality, right?
Yes.
And you don't know any letters she may have received or text messages or things in jail where they can actually communicate electronically. You don't know anything about that?
No.
And she saw you at the request of her attorney, right?
Yes.
And she was charged with murder at that time, correct?
Yes.
Right. Some of the things the sources of information that you got was from her mother, that you talked to her, correct?
Yes, I spoke with her mother on the phone.
And then also Angela Trethewey, her attorney, right?
Yes.
And did you meet with Angela Trethewey several times during this course of the evaluation, in your opinion?
No.
And when you talked to her, you went through and she told you when it came to family history that she was raised in an intact family, correct?
Yes.
She had a normal pregnancy when she was born, right?
Let's see.
It's on page 2 and 3 of your report.
Thanks. I mean, if that's what it says in my report.
Normal childhood, correct?
Yes.
She was known as being headstrong, right?
Yes.
Quote, hard to handle, correct?
Yes.
Lots of arguing in the family?
Yes.
She had no learning difficulties, correct?
That's what she and her mom told me.
She had no special education needs, right?
That's what she and her mom
She
told
didn't
me.
repeat any grades.
That's what she and her mom told me.
Mom says that she was smart.
Yeah.
And the trouble she had in middle and high school, that was actually a defiance issue, not a mental issue.
Well, it was both.
Did you use the word defiance?
Yes. Defiant behavior.
I'm just going off what your report says.
Okay.
So you agree with me it was
Yeah.
a defiance issue,
I'm
right?
talking about her defiance there, and a couple paragraphs later, I'm talking about her mental issues. So they
No.
both were happening at the same time, just not in the report at the same time.
Not related to any academic difficulties, correct?
They didn't report any academic difficulties for her.
You remember on direct you testified that her parents let her when she was about 15 goes and live with a boyfriend, right?
Yeah,
But you agree with me that she was defiant there and had to come back, right?
that's what they told me.
She refused to attend school when she came back.
Yes.
She dropped out before her 18th birthday.
Well, she dropped out and joined Mr. Joyce. So, yeah.
Talked about the substance abuse history that she had. You've already described that. You agree that there was no history of mental health treatment before this event.
Right.
She cut her wrist, but you noted it was superficial, right?
Yeah, typical of borderline personality disorder.
And she diagnosed that there was a suicide attempt in 8th grade taking a bottle of sleeping pills. Is that right?
Yes.
So the only other suicidal act that you have here for her prior to December 8th of 2020 was herself reporting that it was sleeping pills in 8th grade.
Yes.
You don't know what they were, where they came from, or no one else corroborated that, correct?
I don't believe she told anyone else.
So that'd be correct. No one else corroborated.
Right.
And then you noted that there were periods of paranoia, and most of those, you agree with me, were not when Benjamin was around, but it would have been during the time that she was using drugs.
Yeah, she said that she started to have paranoia, and sometimes it was when she was using marijuana, and sometimes it wasn't. And it started years before she met Mr. Joyce, or Mr. Benjamin, sorry.
And then it came to relationship history. When she initially met with Benjamin and Michael, they were discussing spirituality that night.
Yes.
And then she reached out to him a few months later. She reached out, right?
Yes.
In fact, she lied to her parents and left and went to, I think, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
I don't know where it was, but she left to join him.
And she lied to her parents about where she was, correct?
Yes.
And in the beginning, you agree with me that she was, quote, all for having multiple women?
Well, she told me that she was all for it because he explained it in a way that made it make sense. Yes.
And that on page 5 of your report, if you look at the second paragraph, do you see where you wrote down when she explained that she was all for it, but she says, but she also reported that the reality of it was toxic and stressful. It was hard to get along.
Yes, I would expect that of any group of 4 adults living a nomadic lifestyle.
Well,
So,
my
yeah.
question is, did she say, not whether or not you expected, did she say that?
She did.
That's what she described, how she described the environment, correct?
She said it was hard for them all to get along.
She reported frequent arguments, right?
Yes.
She reported that when the third woman joined them, it added to the conflict, correct?
Yes.
And then she reported at some point she returned back to Benjamin, right?
When did she leave him? What?
Do you know the time that she did leave him?
Yeah.
All right, look on page 5, third paragraph of your report. You remember her saying that she returned to him
I see what you're talking about.
and they continued their nomadic lifestyle.
She wasn't allowed, at one point she was allowed to visit her mom, and then she went back to him.
And then, I think it's on page 6, the last paragraph. Do you remember the defendant telling you that when describing the relationship and the group that they're in, she says, you write that she became more frustrated in the relationship. And she reported that she began to take CBD to calm down,
Yes.
right? But you described it as she became more frustrated in the relationship. And that's when she was taking CBD, correct?
Well, when I say that she became more frustrated in the relationship, it's referring to that above paragraph where the things she was getting frustrated about in the relationship was being controlled all the time, not being allowed to go to the grocery store to get stuff for her daughter, not being able to pick out her own baby food. And so the frustration in the relationship was around the control and the isolation that the relationship was requiring of her. So it's referring to that. That's why I started it with the word as. Did I do it again?
It's okay.
Sorry.
Doctor, you're giving a lot of comments, and that's fine. I want all this again from the jury. On the same note, turn to page 7, fourth paragraph. You talk about these phone calls with Benjamin and some of the things and using the urine. But you agree that, like in the phone call and the urine, I mean, that's weird. We get it, urine and all that. But you agree that in that, you don't understand their culture, that maybe for them, and actually in that phone call, he was telling her because you may get sick if you don't do it, correct?
Although that is part of it, the drinking the urine part isn't what concerned me. I mean, you're right, okay, it's weird, whatever, but that's not what concerned me. What concerned me is even if he'd been telling her to drink more water or something, was the way he was telling her, that he was ordering her, he was upset if she resisted at all, and he didn't move on until she broke down and said, I do, Daddy, I do. So that was the part that bothered me, was the control.
I wasn't asking about the part that bothered you. My question was, you agree that in the context of the urine, he was saying things as if she didn't do it, it could be bad for her health. Would you agree with that?
No, not really. He was saying you need to clear your head, and if they don't want you to, if they think you're weird, just tell them that your naturopath told you have to, or you'll get sick. But he wasn't saying that was true. He was saying, here's a lie to tell them if they think it's weird.
And when it comes to the calling someone daddy, you have no idea, do you? If you do, let me know whether or not she even recently has said to anybody like Roger Giddens or somebody that she would refer to them or someone as daddy in a relationship context.
Sorry, I didn't understand that question.
You don't know whether or not the defendant has referred to other people in a relationship like boyfriend, girlfriend, and called them daddy, correct?
Called them what?
Daddy.
Oh, Daddy. I don't know.
And you don't know what she said recently or anything like that, do you, when it comes to daddy and other people, right?
I don't.
And about all these phone calls that we talked about, these were in February of 2021, the ones that you listened to up around that time. Did you know that since that time to February of 2023, there was about 617 calls with the defendant, between the defendant and Benjamin?
I found that out recently.
That's because she didn't tell you about talking to him, did she?
Well, remember, I haven't talked to her since, June of 2021, so.
Pretty accurate to describe that she had a much more robust conversations and her reaching out to him than you knew about, right?
Well, again, anything that happened after June 12th, 2021, I wouldn't have known about, because that's the last time I talked to her.
Turn to page 7, fourth paragraph. In the context, you're talking about the phone calls, I believe.
Okay.
She stated to you, we had a lot of good times. You see that? It's the next to last sentence in that fourth paragraph.
Yes.
We had a lot of good times when it was just us and our baby. You see that?
Yes.
And then she said, we were a normal family for a few moments. It's something I'm really struggling with, right?
Yes.
And then later on, I believe you reported that you talked about on direct that she was crying, have episodes. Is that right?
Probably, when?
When she was in the jail, you met with her. You noticed that she was crying, she was upset.
Oh, during my evaluation. Yes.
Then on page 8 of your report, you talk about she reported frequent and lengthy crying episodes before I think she got on some mess, and it says, and feelings of, what was the word you used?
Let me find it. Where are we on page 8?
Page 8.
Yeah, where?
Let's see if I can find it.
Yeah.
All right. Last paragraph. You
Okay.
go back to the middle.
Okay.
You see on the middle there it says she described her mood.
Yeah.
All right. She described her mood as better recently since initiating medication.
Yes.
She reported frequent and lengthy crying episodes, sadness, and feelings of guilt prior to her Prozac, right?
Yes.
But before that, and feelings of guilt.
Yes.
You noted the word guilt, right?
Yes.
You also know that she was still talking about religious preoccupation,
Yes.
and that she was attentive and concentrated to, her attention and concentration was intact. She was oriented to person, place, and time, and she knew the correct date. And she even knew the correct president, correct?
Yes.
And then when you went on to things about interviewing about the 8, she would say things like, was she not, I felt like the other women were plotting against me. This is on page 9, second paragraph.
Okay. Yes.
She said, I felt like other women were plotting against me, like they were on wavelength that I just wasn't on. They were all on it. They were mean to me and mad at me, and it played in my paranoia even more, right?
Yes.
And then when you get into the specific actions and conduct that she did on December 8th, 2020, she talked about the reason she needed to kill her daughter herself. She said, quote, to pay for the sins I had committed. Page 11 of your report.
Yes.
To pay for the sins I had committed. That's what she said, right?
Well, I mean, that was one of the things I said, and I quoted it in the report. It wasn't the only thing she said.
She was in the room. She described being in the room, correct?
Yes.
She said that she, quote, found a knife, right?
I mean, that might have been the word that I used. I don't think it's in quotes.
So it may not be her word. It may be your interpretation.
Yeah.
That she brought it back to the room,
That she had brought that she had brought a knife back to the room.
and then that she stabbed herself and her daughter and then locked the door.
That's what she told me.
And have you read Dr. Zom's report?
Yes.
And it's a little different what she told Dr. Zom, correct?
There's more detail in Zom's report, and
Right. And Dr. Zom, she said, I walked down the stairs, correct?
I don't have her report in front of me.
Okay.
So
Now, we'll ask Dr. Zom what she said. Judgment approach?
Yes.
I'm getting towards the end, Doctor, so just
yeah.
finish up with some things here. Here's some state's exhibits. You agree with me that when the defendant was in the hospital after she stabbed her baby to death and stabbed herself, that she was able to give statements actually in writing, correct?
Yeah, she couldn't talk because she had.
And you have in your
Right.
hands state's exhibits 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, those exhibits there.
Yes.
All right. Those, just to be sure we're on the same page, those are exhibits where she wrote out, being in the hospital, her answers, right?
Yes. This
It's
is-
her penmanship, her spelling, her dictation, it's her writing, correct?
Yes.
You agree with me that in the handouts that you had there, I think it's probably probably 104 and 106 maybe, that there were 2 Miranda waivers where she waived her Miranda rights, right?
Yes, she did.
She was able to give her social security information, correct?
Yes.
She was able to give her date of birth, right?
Yes.
She was able to give other information that she was tracking and had that in her head, correct?
Yeah, being disorganized wasn't part of her thought disorder. It was being delusional that was part of her thought. So she could give all this information, yes.
Doctor, thank you for your commentary, but that was not my question. My question is, she gave that information from her head, correct?
Yes.
Okay, you're giving commentary. They can do that on redirect.
Oh, sorry.
Doctor, in those statements, like, for example, State's Exhibit 103, you remember that when she was asked, when the detective thought maybe Ben Michael did this, she said, and she wrote it down, he did not do it, I did it, right?
Right.
I was going insane, is what she said, and no longer wanted to be with his friends, but kept coming back for him. I only wanted my baby and husband, but he refused. She wrote that, right?
Yes.
And then she also writes, how long will my prison sentence be for killing her, correct? It states 105.
Yes.
It states 107, she says no. When asked about talking about the knife, she says, no, I went and got a knife.
Yes.
And she apologized. She felt bad about killing her, correct?
Absolutely.
Now, specifically, when you asked her, when asked if she thought her behavior was wrong, she stated, I'm not asking your opinion. I have to be very careful in this, in the sense of the rules of evidence. I'm asking you what she said when you asked her if she thought her behavior was wrong. She stated, 1, yeah, as soon as it happened, I regretted it, correct?
That's what she told me.
2, I thought I shouldn't have done this, right?
After she did it, she thought she shouldn't have done it.
And 3, this was not supposed to happen.
Right.
Doctor, in considering your evaluation of the defendant, including her words and conduct, she described to you in connection with the act of her killing her own child. Is it accurate that the defendant was about 20 years of age?
Yes.
That the victim was 13 months old?
Yes.
That the defendant was the mother?
Yes.
The victim was the child?
Yes.
At some point, the defendant was armed with a knife.
Yes.
The victim was helpless.
Yes.
The defendant never said in any shape or form that the victim threatened her to do harm to her,
Right.
correct? Whether it was right then or in the future, right? The defendant never said the victim, demonic or otherwise, attacked me and I had to defend myself, correct?
Right.
Whether immediately or in the future. She never said that, did she?
About
The
Hannah?
need to her own daughter attacking her.
Right.
And you will agree with me, would you not, that the defendant, this defendant right here, this is the defendant sitting here, correct?
No. Yes.
She never said she was in danger of harm, death, or peril from her own child, correct?
Right. It was by her own hand that she was in danger.
Now, Doctor, the 2 books we talked about, Judgment Approach.
Yes.
Yeah, the DSM file.
Oh, yeah. Do you want these?
No, man, that's not. I'll come back with those. There's actually 3 books I thought about, but changed my mind. We've referenced the Bible, so a religious book, if you would. A psychological book. This is your expertise in psychology here, right?
Yes.
The Rule of Law, or the book of Georgia law. You agree that in this case, you're adding an opinion to one part, mainly the psychological part, correct? For the jury to understand and take in context the law, correct?
Mainly the psychological part. That's what forensic psychology does. Yes.
Each, in a way, can help the jury decide the ultimate issue in this case. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And under Georgia law, part of the thing is that a person is presumed sane. You understand that, right?
Yes.
And that you also understand that under Georgia law that there is no defense of coercion or duress for murder, right?
Actually, sort of, but that's getting into the territory of like, I'm not a lawyer, so.
And that's what I want to get into. But ultimately, solely, at the end of the day, the decision that has to be made in this case, whether or not the defendant, as a matter of law, committed murder by stabbing her child 4 times, is a question of law under all the facts and circumstances that this jury has to make, not you, right?
Oh yeah, it's the jury's job.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
All right. We are going to take a recess, and I will go ahead and tell you, I'm not quite sure how long we're going to go this evening. I'm going to hear from counsel about that while you are out on a 10-minute recess, and then if I need to give you some additional information at that time, I will. Otherwise, stay up here with us, and we will be in recess until 20 till. Leave us your notepads, and we will call for you at 20 till. right, redirect.
All right, Dr. Ballard, you said you had an opportunity to review Dr. Garrett, Dr. Zom's reports, correct?
Yes.
Are either of those two evaluators board certified?
No.
Okay. In this particular case, you've testified that you've done several hundreds of forensic evaluations, correct?
Correct.
And that includes the criminal responsibility evaluations,
Yes.
correct? In this particular case, just because we hired you and are paying you for this, did we ask you to come up with any particular opinion one way or another?
No, that's not how it works, not just with this case, but with any case. Like,
Okay.
they hire me to do an evaluation, then I give them my opinion.
Okay. About how many reports do you think where you found somebody to be sane at the time of the crime?
Sane?
Yes.
for-
Or criminally responsible?
Yeah. No, I know what you meant. I just wanted to make sure you didn't say insane.
Mhm.
Like 90%.
Okay. Did you ever have to testify in court on those cases?
Not on those.
Okay.
No. Can I explain a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah. When an attorney gives an evaluation, they don't know. They know the legal requirements for insanity, but they don't know if their client, they're not a mental health professional. So they often have some kind of feeling like something's not right here, or maybe they know from like a family member, like something's not right here. And so they're doing their job. So they were like, well, let me get like an expert in here to see what's going on. And most of the time, it's something that isn't really helpful to their case. You know, they might have some mental issues, but it's not anything that is like relevant to the case. And so I know we've only worked together once, but there are attorneys that I've worked together, you know, on cases, like many cases. And they know when they call me that they'll get my opinion, and then a lot of times it just won't help anything.
She's giving a narrative. She's just giving a narrative. It's not forcing a question.
All right, direct the witness, please.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
sorry.
If Mr. Focus were to call you from his office and ask you to conduct a forensic evaluation on behalf of the district attorney's office, would you take that case on?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything else of this witness?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you can step in. Thank you. All right, call your next witness, please.
Defense will call Gabriella Kuykendall to the stand. Before you sit down, I'm going to have you raise your right hand. Do you swear the information testimony you're about to give this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Okay, you can have a seat. Okay. Can you state your name and spell your last name for the record, please?
Yes, my name is Gabriella Kuykendall. My last name is spelled Kuykendall.
Okay. And how do you know Ms. Driver?
I met her through Benjamin about, I want to say, maybe 5 years ago when I met her.
Okay.
Or longer than that now.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay. You've been talked about already in this case. Are you the first wife of Mr. Benjamin Ben Michael?
Yes.
Okay. And when did you meet him?
I met him in 2013, and we had met at a March Against Monsanto rally that we were both trying to create. Sorry, I'm a little nervous up here. I don't speak well in front of people.
Okay.
But we were organizing the rally together, and that's where I met him.
Okay. How old were you when you met him?
I was 17.
Do you know how old he was at the time?
I believe he was 33.
Okay. And you met him and you at this, I guess, activism type rally, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then how did your relationship progress from there?
It quickly became very emotional. I pretty much immediately, within a few months, became his girlfriend, and then a couple months later moved in with him at his parents' house.
Okay. When did he declare you to be his wife?
Probably a year or so after I met him.
Okay. Did he give you a name as well?
Yes, he gave me the name Ilioma.
Okay. How would you spell that?
Ayliomah.
Did people just call you Oma for short?
I went by Eily, and then once I had my daughter, our daughter, mine and Benjamin's, I just went by Oma, and we gave her the name Eily.
Eily. Okay. And when you first met him, you said you were living at his parents' house or staying with his parents' house?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about how that relationship progressed. Like, were you both working, doing anything like that?
No, neither of us were working. He was loosely affiliated with a financial group called Primerica. It was like a life insurance investment company, but that he didn't really make any money through that. It's like an MLM sort of thing.
What drew you to him?
Well, I'd never really met anyone like him before. He just knew a lot about like spirituality and, you know, religious sort of doctrine, I guess. And just, you know, I was very naive at the time when I met him, so I never really heard any of those concepts before.
Was he kind of your first serious relationship?
He was my first serious relationship.
Okay, so you quickly moved in together, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and tell me about what happens pretty quickly within your relationship with how he treated you.
Well, things pretty quickly had gotten like controlling. You know, he would just, you know, kind of alienate me from my family and my friends, and yeah, just kind of.
Okay, did he impose certain rules upon you or things that you had to live by?
You mean like early on, or?
Yeah, I mean about your ability to go out in public or hang out with other people.
Well, I mean, at first we just went out together and there was really no problem, but at a certain point, he, you know, if I wanted to go see my friends or my family, he didn't want me to do that.
Okay. Did you have limitations on any of your cell phones, emails, or social media?
Yes, absolutely. I primarily used like Facebook Messenger to talk to like people that I knew, like my friends from high school and stuff. And he would always be controlling the conversation, or whenever I talked to my sister, which is mainly the only person in my family he would let me talk to, he would be right there, the phone would be on speaker, and he would be telling me what to say, basically. Like I couldn't actually have a real conversation with anyone.
Okay. Did he go through your phone frequently?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did he take your phone away from you at times?
At times, yeah, when he thought, you know, like when I wasn't like really happy, like being there with him and I might want to leave, he would like take my phone so I wouldn't be able to leave and call anyone or text anyone to come get me.
Okay. And you said he monitored your social media or your emails as well?
Yeah.
Okay. At what point did your relationship turn physically abusive?
I would say within the first 6 months.
Okay. What are some of the things that you experienced with him?
Well, he would, you know, hit me. There's this one instance, it was one of the worst, I would say, where I wanted to leave. And he had took duct tape and duct taped my entire torso to where I couldn't really breathe very well. And he had just started like beating my face like really bad, open-handed, you know, not close-handed, but he just open-handed. Just he, you know, I was like just seeing the light.
Okay. And there were some other incidents as well, some of that which got reported to law enforcement, is that correct?
Yes, there is a police report about the time where he had me in his basement, and he basically told me that he was going to kill me, and he had a machete to my throat, and he just went into detail like how he was going to do it and how he was going to get away with it. No one would ever know, you know, and I was convinced at the time. It was very frightening. And his father came downstairs because he had heard probably me crying or something, and he, you know, got involved, and then Benjamin kept his father and his mother and me all hostage and wouldn't let us use the phones to call the police.
Okay. After the machete incident, why didn't you leave?
It was just one of those like back and forth sort of like codependent toxic relationships, and it was really hard to get away because every time I left I felt like empty, like I had no purpose to live, you know. I just like would want to kill myself, and so like he was like my main source of like everything, you know, just like my reason to live. At a certain point I was absolutely completely dependent on him emotionally.
When you would leave, would you all start talking or texting again? And
Yeah, I would leave and I would try to not talk to him, and then at a certain point I would, you know, he would just be incessantly messaging me, usually is how that happened, and I would just text him back. I'd be triggered and I would just text him back, and then he had a way of sucking me right back in.
Okay. Did he proclaim you to be one of his wives before or after the machete incident? Do you recall?
I believe it was after that.
Did he make any kind of demands to you about wanting to have children with you or others?
Yeah, he said the only way that I could be his wife exclusively is if I had a child with him in the next year. He kind of gave me like a time limit for that, which is
And
weird.
so you ended up getting pregnant with your daughter?
Yeah, I believe within that time frame, yeah.
Okay. After you got pregnant with your daughter, was he still emotionally or physically abusive with you?
Well, always emotionally abusive. Physically, it kind of dwindled a little bit because, you know, I was pregnant at that point, and there was a few instances where he kind of like, he would like to like suffocate me, and that happened once that I remember while I was pregnant.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you were pregnant, you kind of continued on this nomadic lifestyle, correct?
Yeah, we were just kind of all over the East Coast, just bouncing around from couch to couch. And right before, a few months before I gave birth to my daughter, we stayed at his parents' house and kind of settled in there. And I decided like that I would get I would see a prenatal doctor for, you know, to make sure everything was okay, because he didn't want me to have any prenatal care or give birth in a hospital or anything like that.
Okay, so you kind of tried to take the lead on that
Oh
one.
yeah, at a certain point I started realizing it was like I had a real person that I was about to create, and that they needed that sort of thing.
Okay. During this time, even continuing into your pregnancy, were you still not allowed to go out on your own, or did he regularly check your phone or still control who you talked to or communicated with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Same with social media or email?
Yeah, that never really changed until the end, when I started gaining more like self-confidence and really realizing that I could leave really the relationship.
Okay, and so you had your daughter in August of 2016, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And where did you go from there? Where did you go stay?
We pretty much immediately left his parents' house, and we kind of bounced around for like a little bit, I think like 2 weeks or so, just couch surfing, like friends we knew, and then we ended up at Jerry's house, Jerry Eplin.
Okay, and how long were you at Jerry's house, do you think?
We were there a couple of months, at least 2-3 months.
Okay, and to clarify with you, you were his first wife, technically, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But you are somebody different that left Mr. Ablin's house at a different time. You only know about that through other parties, correct?
I only know about what through the...
Someone else leaving Mr. Ablin's house in a different way. We're not talking, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about your overall relationship. You're still living this kind of nomadic lifestyle. You had your daughter. Was he allowing you to take your daughter places or get any type of early care?
I believe we went to the doctor once after she was born, because DCF had gotten involved immediately at the hospital because his mother was there and told them like he was crazy. And so they immediately got involved, and we went to a doctor's appointment because we had to for the DCF case. And then we just left and sort of abandoned the case. And yeah.
What was the first time you went to leave Mr. Ben Michael? What was the precipitating incident that finally, at least for that first time, got you away from him?
You mean after I had my daughter?
Yes.
Okay. Because before that, I tried to leave many times and did leave and would, go back and forth. But let's see. I guess the straw that broke the camel's back would be when I was staying at Jerry's house with him, and my sister came down for a visit, and he was trying to rope her into the whole polyamory thing. And it's one thing for, it just crossed the line for me with my sister to have her have to deal with that sort of thing,
Was that the first time that your sister kind of got an inside look into the life that you had been leading with him?
No, she knew very well. Like when I would leave him at certain points, I told her everything that happened,
But ultimately, you would be drawn right back to him, kind of based on the bond that you had with him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Have you ever, and this is a personal question, have you ever been diagnosed with any mental health issues or anything like that? Okay. And when this incident with your sister, and he, I guess, invited your sister to be part of your group, how did you manage to get away from him on that particular occasion?
Well, yeah, my sister was there, so she had a car. And she was very, emotionally supportive of me leaving him. And so, I just told him we were leaving. At that point I felt like I could, and I said, we're leaving. I'm leaving with my sister, and I just left.
Okay, but yet, prior to that, you didn't have a car or anything else on your own?
Yeah, no, prior to that, you know, it was just like me and him. Or, I mean, we'd be at Jerry's house, so he would be there. But, you know, there was no leaving. There was no going anywhere, like, unless I just took my daughter and walked away, you know. And then you know, that would be pretty difficult.
Okay, so you left with your sister and your daughter that particular time. How long were you away from him at that point?
I
How long?
think I stayed away from him for about a month or so, and I moved into a farm in Florida, and I tried to like establish some roots for myself and become like financially stable and not have to rely on him. And then, you know, he's just threatening me with you know, taking my daughter away and stuff like that, getting the courts involved. You know, he said, oh, when we're done with you, you know, you're going to be left drooling in a mental institution, you know, stuff like that. And it scared me. You know, I was like, I don't know what could happen. Like, if he paid someone enough money, like a good lawyer or whatever, like, I don't know what he could convince someone of, because he's very convincing. But yeah, so what was the original question?
So how did you end up going back to him with your daughter after that?
Oh, so yeah, we had been talking, and you know, I didn't want to burden the people whose farm I was staying at. I didn't want to burden them with this crazy person, you know. So I just left, and we stayed in Florida, in Tampa, and we lived in a tent, just like homeless, you know, with pretty much nothing.
Okay. What drew you back to him at that point in time?
Really just, he was incessant about wanting to see his daughter. And, you know, as we spent some time apart, you know, I thought, you know, maybe it'd be okay if, like, you know, he saw her and, you know, maybe it'll be okay. I don't know.
When you were apart from him, how would you describe how you felt inside, or what kind of feelings did you experience when you were not around him?
Well, for a really long time, I would just feel like empty, like I had absolutely no reason to continue on, and he always made me he tried to make me think that about myself, that I was nothing without him, and he was the entire purpose for my existence, basically.
Okay. And at times you were feeling suicidal?
Oh, absolutely. There are many times.
Okay. And so you are living with your daughter and him in a tent in Florida. How old was your daughter at that time?
She was about 6 months old.
Okay. And kind of what was the next, I guess, red flag or thing that happened with you in that regard?
Well, just after years of nothing ever really changing, and us always like struggling so badly, you know, and we were just, you know, living in this tent. We had nothing. We were beggars, and we had hardly anything to eat at really any point. My daughter was exclusively breastfeeding, so she was getting what she needed, but I could barely, like, you know, get by. It was just draining it out of me, and there's only so long, you know, someone can do that for before they become malnourished. So I just reached out to my dad, and I said, you know, please just come get me. I need to get out of this situation. This is like, it wasn't really rock bottom, because there have been worse points, but that was a really low point.
Okay. Did he, during this time that you got back together with him, did he make threats about your daughter if you had left again, or what he would do?
Well, yeah, the last time that I actually ever saw him and that he saw our daughter, I was with Chloe, and we were on a trip going to Asheville, and it was like over the course of like 3 days, and he had made threats that he would take my daughter and just disappear with her, and I would never see her again. And that just, like, you know, scared me so bad. I was like, oh, that's never gonna happen. That's never gonna happen. I'm not gonna let that happen. So after that, I vowed to never see him again, and that's how it's been so far.
Okay. And you currently have a case pending in the state of Tennessee with Mr. Ben Michael, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And because you've remarried, correct?
Yes.
All right. And your current husband is trying to adopt your daughter, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that your motivation for being here today, or trying to help Ms. Driver at all?
No. Actually, when I told my lawyer about this to make sure it was okay that I came here and there was like no conflict of interest or anything like that, I said, oh, would you like to speak to her lawyer to just get a better idea of, you know, who this guy is that we're dealing with? And he said, no, that there's, you know, no reason. We have all we need for our court case, because it's just simply based on his abandonment of his daughter. So there's really, well, and the fact that I feel guilty, because Chloe tried to reach out to me a few times, and I just, I spoke with her and kind of told her how my relationship with Benjamin went, but I just felt like I wasn't getting through to her, and that she would just kind of have to learn on her own, and I feel really guilty about not trying to help her more.
Okay. So, you have not seen or heard or talked to Benjamin since when?
We have spoken a few times over the course of the last 6.5, 7 years since he's seen his daughter, just mainly through text or email, and just very limited,
Is it about your daughter, generally speaking?
Not really, never really about her, but yeah.
Okay, so you left this relationship with your daughter and kind of didn't look back at this last time, correct?
Yeah.
All right. And then you got a call from the Canton Police Department on December 14th of 2020, correct?
Yeah.
All right. And in that phone call, you kind of learned about this whole circumstance, correct?
Yes.
And you provided Detective Cruz at that time all of the information regarding your relationship with Mr. Ben Michael, correct?
Yeah.
And kind of talked to her about your relationship with him and how things ended and that kind of thing, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Did you tell Detective Cruz anything about you being concerned about a potential abuse against Chloe? Do you recall?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. Do you remember talking to Detective Cruz in that phone call about that you had been concerned about Chloe or that she might have been being abused?
Yeah, when I first got the call, I thought that Benjamin had, because she didn't tell me exactly what happened, and I just thought Benjamin had killed Chloe. That was my first thought because of his abusive nature. So I thought maybe it got out of hand, and yeah.
Okay. And you've talked to us today about some of the incidents of physical abuse, but is it fair to say that's just a small snippet of what you actually endured in that time that you were with him?
Yeah, there were multiple instances of abuse that went on.
Did you feel like that you were free to leave whenever you wanted?
Not really. I mean, there were good points, I guess, just more normal points where I guess his mental illness would kind of relax, and then there would be points where it would ramp up really bad, and he would just start acting totally crazy, talking in tongues and screaming and being abusive physically. And so it was really at those points that I wanted to leave, and that's when he would have more of a grip on he could tell that I wanted to leave, so he would be more controlling at those points.
Okay. Is he still trying to, I guess, take your daughter away is not the right word, but is he still trying to kind of manipulate that relationship with you?
You mean manipulate?
Well, when you filed this adoption case, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and then he turned around and filed something different, correct?
He wanted visitation, after 6.5 years of not seeing my daughter or even asking to see her. So he wanted visitation, and so I immediately filed the adoption.
But he hasn't seen your daughter in 6+ years, I guess?
No, and after, after the whole incident with Chloe and him happened, and things kind of cooled down over a month or so, I told him that he could see his daughter for some reason, and so it was just over 9 months that I was telling him we were trying to make plans where he would come and see her. He's like, oh, I just need to get my RV fixed, and it was always an excuse. It was 9 months later after that incident that he never saw her during that entire time, even though I was 100% open and willing to it. And so at that point I was yeah, I just stopped talking to him because it wouldn't be right for him to just go in and out of my daughter's life like that.
During this time period, have you kind of tried to live off the radar to avoid contact with him or him being able to find out where you are?
Oh, absolutely. I'm constantly thinking about at any point if he might show up, and try to take my daughter or hurt me,
In your experience with him and trying to leave, he would basically tell you that you would never see your daughter again, or he would take steps that way to make sure that happened?
Yeah, there are multiple instances where he threatened that I would never see my daughter either because, he would win in the courts, or he would physically take her, abduct her and take her away from me, and I would never be able to find him or my daughter.
But it's your testimony here today that your experience with him in the relationship, you endured physical abuse,
Yeah.
okay, and emotional and mental abuse as well,
Yeah.
okay, and that he controlled your phone, who you talked to, who you spoke to, wrote emails to, or connected with on social media, correct?
Yeah.
All right, and that was kind of one of the rules that you had to live by to be in that relationship, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And that it took you several different times of leaving and coming back before you were finally able to break away from that, correct?
Yeah. It was a terrible cycle of leaving, coming back, leaving, coming back. And
Okay. And to this day, what do you attribute as to the reason why you were finally able to get away from him entirely?
I guess I would say, well, that one instance with my sister, that really helped, having her there physically to help me leave physically and just emotionally. But I guess over the last few times that I kind of left, and then I would come back and ultimately left him for good, I think I had just gained like self-confidence in that area, like that I realized that I could actually do that, and that that I could, I guess.
In your kind of determination to become self-confident and get away from him, when you were with him, did he make you feel like that you were nothing without him and you couldn't succeed without him?
Yes.
Okay. Can I just have a moment? Yes. I don't have any further questions of this witness.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm okay.
Is it Kai Kendall?
Yeah.
You referenced that, what did you call him, Benjamin?
No, I called him Z. I just call him Benjamin now.
Z, okay. And you used the word to describe him as crazy, and you talked about sort of his mental illness. Do you know about, and you referenced his mom at the hospital, telling the hospital something. What did they tell him about his mental illness?
What did who tell? Or like his mom? What did his mom tell me?
Sure. What do you know about him being diagnosed with a mental illness?
Well, when I first got together with him, he was with another woman, Jennifer. I don't remember her last name, but they had been together. They had met at an institution, a mental institution, and he was on medicine at the time for what I believe is schizoaffective bipolar disorder, is what she told me. And so they were together for 2 years while he was fully medicated, and then he was like just stable, had a job, and they were engaged to get married, like a monogamous relationship. And then he stopped taking his medicine, even though I believe it was court ordered, is what she had told me. It was like court ordered for him to be medicated, and so he had stopped taking it and just became a totally different person.
Okay. So he had been diagnosed with a mental illness.
Yes, from what she said and from what his mother has said, yes.
Okay. And you referenced the fact that there were a couple of things. When you talked to Detective Cruz in December of 2020, have you had a chance to listen to that interview?
I did.
Okay. And one of the things that you told her is one of the main reasons you left is because you wanted your child to be able to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
Okay. And you also told her that him trying to sort of recruit your sister as one of his second wives crossed a line, and
Yeah, that crossed the line for me.
that also sort of motivated you to leave. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. And you told Detective Cruz that you had only ever met Chloe one time. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And was that what you referenced earlier when you were talking
That
about?
Asheville trip we went on, yeah. It was like,
When was that?
Oh, I don't know. My daughter was around just over a year old when that trip happened, so that would have been 2017, like
Okay.
sometime in the summer.
All right. So the one and only time you ever met Chloe Driver was in 2017?
Yeah.
And you referenced the fact that at certain points when you left him that you wanted to commit suicide. Is that right?
Yes.
And you've never been diagnosed with any type of mental illness?
No.
Was that based on the reality that you were living in with him, that you wanted to end your life?
I just think he drives women to not even necessarily women, men too, but predominantly women. He just drives them to such a crazy point with all these crazy ideas that he puts in their head, making them question everything about reality, which isn't necessarily like a bad thing. But then it's like your reality is totally like broken apart, and then he starts connecting all these dots for you, and like starts controlling the way you think. If that helps.
Okay. But that was based on your experiences were based on the real things that you experienced with him.
Yeah.
Okay. Not based on any delusions in your mind. Based on things
yeah,
you
no,
actually
yeah,
experienced?
exactly, yeah.
Okay. And is it fair to say, I know you said you only met Chloe one time in 2017. It's fair to say you don't know what her mental state was in December of 2020?
I really have no idea.
Okay.
I
And,
could, oh, sorry.
and you referenced sort of, I think you said you'd go back and forth, you'd leave him, you'd come back, you'd leave him, you'd come back. During that period of time, did you ever cause any harm to your child?
No.
And you indicated that back in 2020, when Detective Cruz called you, isn't it true that you told her that you didn't have any knowledge of his treatment of Chloe at all?
I didn't, only just from what I've heard from other people, you know.
Okay.
Like Brett Tabar, I think at that point that's the only person.
Okay, you can't tell me what anybody else said, but from your own, every witness has to testify about their own personal knowledge,
Yeah.
what they saw with their own eyes, heard with their own ears.
Gotcha.
From your personal knowledge,
Mhm.
you told Detective Cruz that you didn't have any information about his treatment of Chloe Driver, right?
No, I've never seen or heard anything.
Okay. And you said a moment ago that she had reached out to you, but that you didn't feel like you could get through to her. Is that the
Yeah, I
language you
tried to
used?
explain like my situation, like my relationship with him, and the abusiveness and psychological torment. And I just don't think, you know, at that point she could like realize that was what was even, or maybe it wasn't happening at that point to her. I don't know. But she did reach out to me a couple of times, so maybe that's when that started for her and him, between them.
Okay. But your perspective at that point was that she was still choosing to stay in that situation?
Yeah, in that situation. I mean, she had left. There was at least one point where she went to her parents' house and she had left, and she had called me when she was away from him, or at least I think she was. He could have been next to her, and he could have been telling her what to say, you know, just to get things out of me. I don't really know.
Okay. And when is the last time that you talked to Z?
I think it was when, it was like over a year ago at this point. He called me because he thought I was going up to Connecticut, and so he called me and just to talk. And it quickly turned into just, screaming.
Okay. So you don't maintain any kind of a relationship with him?
No.
Okay. Do you know where he lives?
I mean, I think his like physical address is like 425 Fall Mountain Road.
But he doesn't?
He
you
doesn't
say-
actually really live there. He'll go back there
Okay.
sometimes.
All right. Fair to say that from your knowledge, he still has a lifestyle where he doesn't have roots?
Yeah.
Okay. You referenced that you and him lived in a tent at one point with your infant?
Yes.
Okay. I have nothing further. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you.
We're done.
Any reason to keep the witness? Thank you. You can be excused. All right, so we are going to conclude for the day. We will ask you to return back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Leave us your notepads. Don't talk to anyone about this case. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 9.
Chloe, can you stand up and raise your right hand? Do you swear the information and testimony you're about to give this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You're gonna have to answer out loud so court can hear
Yeah,
you.
and if you need to,
Here, slide up,
I'm not going to
slide up.
switch that microphone around.
Give me that mic.
All right, Ms. Driver, I just want to make sure you understand your rights in regard to whether you testify or not in this case. You have a right to remain silent. You cannot be compelled to testify in this case. That is the fundamental, I guess, threshold that I presume you've talked to your lawyers about, that is your right.
Yes.
Many issues of whether or not a witness is called to testify or not are up to lawyers. It is what's called trial strategy. Lawyers can make decisions about what evidence to present and what witnesses to call. However, that's not true of your testimony. Nobody can force you to testify, but nobody can tell you you cannot testify. That is also your right. You understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
If you chose to testify, you would take the witness stand, you would be placed under oath, and you would be subject to cross-examination, just like any other witness. You understand that?
Yes.
As I said, the decision about whether or not you testify is yours and nobody else's, but it is a decision you should make only after you've had an opportunity to have a full conversation about that with your attorneys. They are obviously trained in the law and experienced in dealing with juries and in cases of this kind, and so you should have a full discussion with them and pay attention to what their recommendation is as far as whether or not you should testify or remain silent. But again, that is ultimately up to you. That is your choice. If you choose not to testify, the jury would be instructed that they could not consider that as any evidence that you are guilty. A little wrinkle in this case is that it is your burden to show the jury that you are not guilty but mentally ill, not guilty by reason of insanity or guilty but mentally ill. That is your burden to show by what's called a preponderance of the evidence. You understand that?
Yes.
So the decision about whether or not you testify should also be made in consideration of that. Generally, defendants are under no burden of proof. They don't have to prove anything. It's all on the state to prove guilt by evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. But there is a distinction, a difference in your case with this not guilty by reason of insanity defense. You understand that?
Yes.
Do you feel like you've had enough time to talk to your attorneys about your decision?
Yes.
Do y'all intend to have any further conversations about that? Do you feel like you've adequately discussed it with your client?
Yeah. Yes. We're fine.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I don't remember which one of you stated. Mr. Kessler, I think, stated that you wanted to exercise your right to remain silent. You didn't intend to testify. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. You're not bound by that at this point, and until your attorneys rest your case, you still have the opportunity to change your mind and testify if you want to. You understand that?
I do.
Okay. Thank you. You can be seated. Do you have any additional evidence that you intend to present, Ms. Trethewey?
No, I think we're ready to rest.
Okay. So you'll do that in the morning in front of the jury. As far as I know, we'll have Dr. Zom available in the morning. At this point, does either side anticipate presenting any rebuttal?
We have some brief rebuttal. Would you like to present that prior to Dr. Zom's testimony? I guess the statute's kind of silent about rebuttal factually to other things. We'll do it whenever the court thinks is appropriate.
Well, I guess at this point, since I have requested that Dr. Zom be here tomorrow morning, I'd like to go ahead and get her up and down, and then if there's any rebuttal or rebuttal, then I'll allow you to do it at that time.
Understood. We have very brief rebuttal.
I do not have a final draft of the jury charge, but y'all correct me if I'm misspeaking, but it looks like there are a good many requests that are in an abundance of caution, we'll ask for this. The request about lesser included offenses.
We were actually planning on talking about those tonight, just to see what can be requested based on the evidence presented. You had requested our requested charge, we emailed them to you, but apparently we never actually filed them, so we've just filed the ones that we had emailed you officially right now.
Okay.
I do have a few extras that I've been working on that I forgot to bring with me over here this afternoon, so we may have those to file in the morning, but they are all in line with the idea of insanity provision, based on some of the arguments we've previously made in the case.
Okay.
You said you're going to file amended? Okay.
Yeah, there's like 4.
Are they pattern charges or are they
No,
other things?
case law based.
Okay, well, as soon as you can get those to me and to Ms. Roper, I would appreciate that.
I'll try to email them to everybody tonight and officially have them filed tomorrow morning.
Your Honor, the state's probably, based on the testimony that came out today, Dr. Ballard kept using the term coercion in her testimony, so the state's probably going to be requesting a charge that the defense of coercion is not available for the crime of murder in the state of Georgia. Obviously, that's statutory, but.
We're not.
I just don't want there to be any confusion about coercive.
Well, what does the state say about voluntary manslaughter or involuntary manslaughter? Or, I think it was criminal negligence.
I would need to pull up the request
not
charge.
yet, criminal, or cruelty to children in the second.
Your Honor, I can provide the court with the case law that specifically says that an infant cannot provide the provocation necessary to justify that charge. That's one of the things that I had discussed with the defense and us communicating about potential plea negotiations. Additionally, I think there's no evidence that this was a negligent act. It is clear that it was an intentional act. Cruelty in the second or murder in the second relates to an act of negligence. There's no evidence of negligence in this case. The sole issue is whether she could form the intent or not. But if she could form the intent, it was clearly intentional and malicious and not a negligent act. The state would object to charging on either of those things. And I'm happy to provide the authority to the court.
You don't have to provide any authority. If y'all are, the defense is moving forward with those requests, I need to hear some authority from you on that. I'm going to spend some time with the charge this evening as well. And hopefully, as soon as we get through the evidence, the jury may take a little bit longer lunch tomorrow because we'll have to discuss all that before closing. Anything else?
So we don't anticipate closing until after lunch, then, is what I'm hearing.
Well, I don't want to mislead you. I am just kind of guesstimating based on how long the other two experts have been on the stand that Dr. Zom's testimony may take some time. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Can I inquire what order she's being questioned in?
I'm sorry?
Dr. Zom, did the court make a decision about who's to question her first or whether you're going to give a preliminary instruction?
I thought I already said all this. If I didn't, the introduction or the instruction is that sometimes the law requires that an independent witness become involved in the case or third party evaluate. I don't know the exact verbiage. We talked about it in chambers, and that I thought that was everybody was in agreement with that.
Yes,
I also thought that it was again just for lack of. Somebody has to go first. I didn't hear any objection to the state going first. Is there any? Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. I'll see y'all tomorrow morning at 9.